The Munsters are widely recognized as the most endearing family of monsters on television. However, one incident in 1965 went too far. This is the tale that nearly brought the program to a close, complete with perilous stunts and illicit props. The tape was permanently hidden away because of how awful what transpired that day was. We are now revealing the true reason why this episode was never shown and why the cast remains silent about it for decades. The 1960s was not the beginning of the Munsters concept. In fact, it all started in the 1940s when Looney Tunes animator Bob Clampett developed an idea for a humorous monster family animation. He spent years working on it, but it never gained traction. The concept simply waited for the ideal opportunity. In the early 1960s, that time finally arrived. Known for their work on Rocky and Bullwinkle, comedy writers Alan Burns and Chris Hayward made a similar approach. Charles Addams' New Yorker cartoon, which portrayed a spooky yet endearing family, served as their inspiration. However, rather than coming up with something entirely unique, they looked to Universal Studios. The rights to iconic monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein belonged to Universal. They recognized a chance to incorporate these well-known animals into a sitcom. Everything was shaped by that choice. Herman Munster turned into a father in the vein of Frankenstein, complete with bolts around his neck and a quirky yet endearing demeanor. Grandpa became Count Dracula in a humorous way. On a peaceful suburban neighborhood, the family resided in a massive, dilapidated mansion. They saw themselves as a typical family. They were terrible to the rest of us. This idea was developed and made a reality by authors Ed Haas and Norm Liebman. Love Thy Monster, the first pilot they developed, established the characters and the sarcastic tone of the program. The Munsters had no intention of frightening anyone. All they wanted was to live like any other family in America. The comedy was centered around that. The moment was just right. Classic monster films began resurfacing in the early 1960s. Audiences were falling in love with Universal's classic horror pictures again when they began to be re-released. TV required the concept of combining sitcom humor with monsters. The show's development was greatly influenced by Universal Studios. They had the legal right to use the old monster designs since they were theirs. This gave the program a distinctive appearance that was reminiscent of the well-known horror movies from Hollywood. Excellent special effects and makeup were also supplied by the studio. The series featured work by renowned makeup artist Bud Westmore. He ensured that Herman, Grandpa, and the others were expressive enough for comedy, but also had the appearance of actual movie monsters. Universal had an impact on the show's tone in addition to its aesthetics. The Munsters loved horror films rather than mocking them. The illusions would appeal to fans of vintage monsters, and the family's daily hardships would make the broader public giggle. The Munsters was fundamentally a parody of suburban life. The family considered themselves perfectly normal. They went to work and school, ate dinner together, and discussed daily issues. However, they frequently perplexed and alarmed their neighbors due to their hideous looks. This contrast was cleverly used in the show. Additionally, the show made mockery of conventional family sitcoms. Like Fathers and Father Knows Best or Leave It to Beaver, Lily urges Herman to have a serious conversation with Eddie in one episode. However, Herman's advice is so absurd that it becomes a joke. The show humorously and creatively experimented with these sitcom cliches. Al Lewis and Fred Gwynne, meanwhile, did more than just portray Herman and Grandpa Munster. They were the focal point of the performance. Years ago, they began their path to the Munsters on a separate show called Car 54. You're Where? Their camaraderie was evident when they portrayed mismatched New York police cops. Together, audiences adored them. More significantly, they actually became close friends. When the Munsters arrived in early 1964, that bond persisted. Producers decided immediately who should play Herman and Grandpa when casting started. Lewis and Gwynne were the first to be selected. The Munster family felt authentic because of their friendship. Changing, he was dressed in bulky boots with multiple layers of padding and 4-inch lifts. His attire contributed between 40 and 50 pounds to the total. It was exacerbated by the heat from the studio lights. In one day of filming, he once shed 10 pounds. He gave every scene his best effort in spite of everything. Herman became one of the most memorable TV characters ever thanks to his deep voice, silly giggle, and innocent charm. Long after the show ended, he and Lewis remained close off-screen. Their camaraderie was as strong as what viewers seen on TV. Not all casting choices were so easy. The Munster matriarch was originally portrayed by Joan Marshall and was called Phoebe. However, there was an issue. She bore too much resemblance to Morticia Addams from the soon-to-be-aired rival program, The Addams Family. They made the decision to switch because viewers would confuse the two shows. Lily Munster was used in place of Phoebe, who was discarded. They decided on Yvonne De Carlo as their new actress. De Carlo was well known for his dramatic parts. She had acted in serious movies, like The Ten Commandments. At first, Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis weren't pleased. De Carlo disproved their doubts about her ability to handle the humor. One straightforward instruction was given to her. Play Lily as a traditional housewife from the 1950s, but with a gothic twist. She knew exactly what she had to do. Herman's silly side was counterbalanced by her grace and charm. She quickly established herself as a vital member of the Munster family. Eddie Munster, played by Butch Patrick, wasn't the first actor to perform the part. Nate Happy Durman played Eddie in the original, unaired pilot. The Eddie of that era was a spoiled brat. They changed it since it didn't mesh with the show's playful tone. After Patrick took over, Eddie developed a more endearing demeanor. Though mischievous, he was never cruel. This helped the show connect with families by making him more relatable to younger viewers. The Munsters were more than simply a job to Patrick. It played a significant role in his early years. Working with Gwynne and Lewis gave him valuable acting training. He has talked positively about those years, recalling the fun he had on site. He held those recollections with him even after the performance finished. Early on, Marilyn Munster's role also evolved. She was initially portrayed by Beverly Owen. However, after 13 episodes, she quit. In the first place, she had no desire to accept the position. She felt terrible on set after being duped into signing a contract. She even occasionally left crying. Producers had to locate a replacement once she eventually managed to breach her contract. Pat Priest took over at that point. Priest was a perfect fit. The only monster who resembled a normal young woman was Marilyn, although she never thought her family was odd. They seemed perfectly normal to her. There were some really funny moments because of that disparity. By providing viewers with a relatable character, her presence also served to balance the program. Priest developed close relationships with her co-stars over time, and her portrayal of Marilyn gained the same level of notoriety as the other Munsters. The Munster house, located at 1313 Mockingbird Lane, was more than simply a location, though. It was a personality unto itself. The house had a charm that made it feel like a real home, even if it looked like something from an old horror movie. Its design was influenced by Victorian-era houses, particularly those in San Francisco, but it was darker and more spookier to reflect the monstrous history of the Munsters. In reality, the house's facade was a hybrid of a Hollywood set and a real building. The Munsters lived in a house that was altered from a backlit at Universal Studios. A soundstage was used to construct the inside, and every element was meticulously planned. The humor of the act was influenced by the underground laboratory, the dusty chandeliers, and the majestic staircase. The house has hidden rooms and secret corridors that frequently appeared in the narrative. Occasionally, Herman might unintentionally break through a wall. At other occasions, Grandpa's experiments in the basement would go terribly wrong. It was clear that the episode was based on Universal's legendary horror movies, like Dracula and Frankenstein. These movies' influence gave the house the ideal balance of eerie and goofy. Although it had a ghostly appearance, it was never frightening. The monsters were as difficult to create behind the scenes as they were on film. The performers had to cope with the challenges of performing under intense lighting, lengthy makeup treatments, and bulky costumes. Filming was very difficult because of Fred Gwynne's suit. The layers of padding and the weight of his boots made even basic movements difficult. Despite their beauty, Yvonne De Carlo's costumes were challenging to wear. The Drag ULA is one of the most bizarre vehicles in Munster's history. It resembles a vehicle from a Halloween fever fantasy. It was constructed from a real fiberglass casket. The concept originated in the Hot Rod Herman episode from 1965, in which Grandpa Munster had to construct a dragster in order to regain possession of the family's other vehicle. However, obtaining the casket was not simple. The sale of one without a death certificate was prohibited by California law at the time. Richard Corky Corcas, who collaborated with George Barris, the car's designer, needed to be cunning. He discovered a funeral home that was open to a compromise. At night, they left the coffin outside the back door. No inquiries were made. The remainder of the automobile came together quickly once they got it. It had 350 horsepower from a Ford V8 engine that was 289 cubic inches in size. The exhaust pipes resembled an organ from a church. The rear tires were enormous racing slicks made of Firestone. The small front wheels belonged to an ancient buggy. To add to the eerie atmosphere, each hubcap had a silver spider. The vehicle made an appearance in Munster Go Home. And over time, at least 5 iterations were constructed. Some found their way into private collections, while others ended up in museums. Then there was the coach from Munster. The Munster coach was designed for flair, whilst the Dragulé was designed for speed. This Batmobile was developed by George Barris, who also designed the one from the 1960s. He stretched 3 1926 Model T bodies over a chassis from a 1927 touring car. The show itself became as well known as the Munster coach. It made appearances in exhibitions, parades, and even private collections. The actors faced their own challenges behind the scenes. Grandpa Munster actor Al Lewis had an unexpected challenge: his prosthetic nose. The nose was initially significantly longer than most fans recall, but something was wrong. His nose grew moist, became soggy, and lost its form every time he drank coffee. The makeup crew ultimately decided to cut it short because it was becoming so much of a bother. Fair Munster, the Munsters' unaired pilot, had a significant influence on the program. In order to sell the series to networks, it was filmed in late 1963. Although this early version differed from the final version that was shown, it laid the groundwork. The fact that it was shot in color was one of the biggest surprises. It made sense at the time because TV was shifting toward more colorful shows, but when the show was formally picked up, things changed. In addition to saving money, shooting in black and white provided the series a vintage horror vibe, making it resemble the classic monster films for which Universal was renowned. The identical suburban street used in Leave It to Beaver was used to film the pilot on Universal's back lot. The joke included that, despite having a pet dragon and a haunted-looking home, the Munsters were supposed to be just another typical family. Everything was funnier because of the contrast. Norman Abbott directed, and Norm Liebman and Ed Haas wrote the script. Although it needed some tweaks, this early draft was ready for television and included all the necessary components. The casting was one of the most notable variations. Joan Marshall as Phoebe Munster in the pilot. Yvonne De Carlo played this role, which was eventually changed to Lily. The creators reconsidered the job since Phoebe resembled Morticia from the Addams Family in both appearance and behavior. In addition to being eerie, they wanted Lily to be kind and nurturing. That balance was achieved by switching the actress. Eddie Munster was unique, too. Nate Derman played him, and he was a much more aggressive Eddie. His crazy behavior, snarling, and cruel streak gave him the appearance of a real monster rather than a naughty child. As the show progressed, Butch Patrick took his position, which helped the producers make Eddie more approachable and lighthearted. He felt more like a kid from a sitcom than a monster from a horror film, even if he was still a werewolf youngster. Grandpa Munster and Herman remained unchanged. Al Lewis and Fred Gwynne had already been cast in the pilot, and their roles were essentially predetermined. But Herman was portrayed somewhat differently. He wasn't yet as adorable or silly. This version sounded more like a classic Frankenstein monster than a bumbling but loving father, since he was more serious and had a deeper voice. When the show was picked up, that changed. They made him more likable and humorous by softening his personality. The pilot's voice also sounded odd. Though it skewed more toward horror, there was humor. The soundtrack was altered as well. The pilot's theme music had a lighthearted vibe because it had a surf rock vibe. However, it didn't exactly fit the show's eerie mood. One of the most iconic TV songs ever was created with the final version's brass-heavy tune. The pilot fulfilled its obligations in spite of its disagreements. By demonstrating to networks how laughter and horror could coexist in a family sitcom, it assisted Universal Studios in pitching the Munsters. CBS needed some tweaks, but they liked the premise. They demanded a move toward comedy, a black and white format, and new casting. The Munsters were a great success because of these changes. Fans may now watch the evolution of the show by purchasing the unaired pilot on DVD. It is a unique opportunity to see an early iteration of something that would later become iconic. The Munsters was more than just a humorous program about a family of monsters. It said something. It addressed important themes of acceptance and what it means to be different beneath the slapstick and gags. In their own perspective, the Munsters were normal, loving, and nice, despite their frightening appearance. But it wasn't always that way in the world around them. Operation Herman, which aired in 1965, was one episode that underwent a tonsillectomy and was recuperating in the hospital. Herman wanted to visit him because he was a loving father. The issue was that it was practically hard to sneak in due to his enormous size and Frankenstein-like visage. The hilarity that followed was typical Munsters. Miscommunications, humor, and a medical staff member who believed Herman was a patient who had strayed. However, the program was not just full of dumb jokes. At one point, Lily advises Herman to speak with Eddie directly. This type of incident was common in the era's family comedy. Even Father Knows Best, a program renowned for its ideal all-American family, was mentioned by Lily. In his typical naive yet endearing manner, Herman responded that these kinds of conversations were typically found on the Donna Reed program. Although it was a minor joke, it revealed the Munsters' self-perception. It didn't aim to be the ideal, well-executed sitcom. It was different, something that knew what it was like to be alienated. This theme appeared in numerous episodes. A neighbor in My Fair Munster laments that the neighborhood was pleasant before to the Munsters' arrival. Despite being played for laughs, the line captured a genuine problem in the 1960s. Because they were different, many families experienced discrimination. Munster Masquerade, another episode, expanded on the concept. The one and only Marilyn Munster. The family member with the average appearance had a boyfriend. Before they saw her family, his parents were thrilled to meet her. They wanted nothing to do with Marilyn as soon as they discovered she hailed from a monster-infested household. Because the joke reversed expectations, it was successful. To the outside world, Marilyn was the only one who belonged, even though she was the odd one out in her family. It was an obvious message. People may make inaccurate assumptions about other people based solely on their outward appearance. Eddie's moniker was one of the most impactful scenes in the entire series. Eddie was uneasy. And Herman seated him for a conversation. One of the most remarkable speeches from the show was what he told him. Whether you are tall or short, fat or skinny, ugly or lovely like your father, or black, yellow, or white, it doesn't matter what you look like. That's the lesson I want you to learn. It makes no difference. The strength of your character and the magnitude of your heart are what count. For a humorous sitcom, this was a daring move. It was not concealed by humor. A joke didn't soften it. It was straightforward. It was truthful. Additionally, it resonated with viewers. The Munsters stood out for this reason. It was more than just monsters surviving in the real world. The topic of discussion was how individuals handle those who are different. It made a serious point with fun. And it accomplished it in a manner that seems current even now. The Munsters was a family sitcom unlike any other when it debuted on television on September 24, 1964. But with a grandfather right out of a horror movie, a werewolf son, a vampire mother, a Frankenstein-like father, and monsters. It was odd, but it was effective. Its blend of humor and traditional monster cliches won over viewers, and by the conclusion of its first season, it was one of the most watched television programs. In the Nielsen ratings, it came in at number 18, exactly behind Gilligan's Island. Critics also paid attention. The program received a Golden Globe nomination in 1965. A unique distinction for a comedy with such a unique idea. Its enduring influence would be recognized years later when it was nominated for several TV Land Awards. One award specifically acknowledged the cast shift, with Pat Priest playing Marilyn Munster in place of Beverly Owen. The sitcom held its appeal despite a significant character being recast, but no show maintains its popularity indefinitely. ABC introduced something new in January 1966. Batman captivated audiences right away with its vibrant colors, jam-packed episodes, and campy sense of fun. Those who had previously watched The Munsters were now focused on Gotham City. The Munsters' ratings began to decline. It fell all the way to number 61 in the rankings at the end of its second season. After seeing the numbers, the network placed the call. The Munsters were terminated in May 1966. The Munsters' legacy extends well beyond their initial run. The 1960s. The characters have survived spin-offs, movies, and reboots throughout the years, demonstrating that the Munster family's eerie yet innocent charm never truly goes away. The Munsters Today was one of the most prominent sequels, airing from 1988 until 1991. This follow-up series had an intriguing strategy. It said that Grandpa had unintentionally put the family into a deep sleep for 22 years, rather than going straight from the original. They were striving to adapt to a new era in the late 1980s when they eventually woke up. The show, which lasted for 73 episodes and starred Lee Meriwether as Lily, Jason Marsden as Eddie, and Howard Morton as Grandpa, outlasted the original series. Munster Go Home, the first full-length Munsters film, was released in theaters in 1966, right before the conclusion of the original series. The Munsters were initially shown to audiences in color, which enhanced their frightening yet charming appearances. According to the movie's narrative, Herman inherits a British house, which sets off a crazy journey through England that includes a drag race, cunning relatives, and a hidden treasure. With Fred Gwynne, Yvonne DiCarlo, and Al Lewis returning as Herman, Lily, and Grandpa, respectively, it maintained the series' essence. A number of TV-based films were produced in an effort to bring the franchise back to life. Despite bringing most of the original ensemble back together, The Munsters' Revenge, 1981, failed to generate enough interest to revive the program. Two other TV films starring fresh actors attempted to recreate the enchantment in the 1990s, but none of them made an impression. However, reboots have been another matter. There have been numerous attempts to revive The Munsters. Mockingbird Lane, a darker, more dramatic adaptation of the series helmed by Bryan Singer and featuring Jerry O'Connell as Herman, was created by NBC in 2012. It never progressed past the pilot episode, despite having excellent production values. The Munsters were briefly considered moving to trendy Brooklyn in 2017, but the plan was swiftly shelved. The most recent attempt to revive the Munsters feature film was made by filmmaker Rob Zombie in 2022. Zombie's rendition, in contrast to other attempts, mostly relied on campy comedy and a vibrant, exaggerated style. The movie, which starred Daniel Roebuck as Grandpa, Sherry Moon Zombie as Lily, and Jeff Daniel Phillips as Herman, caused controversy. While some fans thought the plot lacked depth, others enjoyed its nostalgic tone. Nevertheless, The Munsters' public visibility was maintained by its Netflix release, demonstrating the family's continued relevance in popular culture. Movies and music. The Munsters have received numerous tributes from television programs such as The Simpsons, particularly in their Treehouse of Horror episodes. The degree to which Stranger Things has ingrained itself in popular culture is demonstrated by the fact that Eddie Munster served as some inspiration for the character of Eddie Munson. Over the years, other artists have covered the show's iconic theme tune, demonstrating how familiar it still is. However, what really makes the Munsters memorable are the personalities. Originally portrayed by Fred Gwynne, Herman Munster came to represent the fun and spirit of the program. Even monsters can be lovable, as demonstrated by the fact that he was a humorous and loving father figure despite his Frankenstein-like look. Innumerable television programs and movies have mocked and copied his childish excitement and loud, booming laugh. Al Lewis's portrayal as Grandpa Munster added another level of humor. He was a crazy vampire who loved doing crazy experiments and was constantly stirring up problems in his lab in the basement. He was one of the most adored characters because of his naughty nature and classic Dracula charm. Over the years, numerous humorous interpretations of vampires have also been influenced by him. The Munsters' influence extends beyond sentimentality. It influenced sitcoms that combine humor with the paranormal. The Addams Family, which aired at the same time, was equally successful. The tone of the two series was considerably different, with the Addams Family leaning toward dark humor and the Munsters being more lighthearted. Later television programs like What We Do in the Shadows, which strikes a balance between vampire knowledge and ridiculous humor, and even Stranger Things, which blends supernatural aspects with poignant family relationships, were influenced by this blend of comedy and horror. It was a parody of the ideal American family in suburbania, reversing the trend by making its grotesque characters the most wholesome aspect of the program. That allure endures decades later, demonstrating that the basic enchantment of the Munsters endures despite the prevalence of contemporary sitcoms and expensive reboots.